Panic came, and then it was quiet, calm and serene inside her skull. And even if she were asked to say something now, nothing but childish nonsense would come out of her mouth. Such silence, unusual for a small shared apartment, where usually on the periphery of the maddening number of unnecessary sounds both inside and outside stood for a couple more minutes, until finally, one conscious thought visited her. "Damn it," muttered Maya. "Damn it. 2 stripes." Although Maya had never been prone to swearing and strong language, she was tolerant of it, had nothing against it. Sometimes, for the beauty of the word, you could use profanity. What nonsense am I thinking about? Maya restrained herself. That's right, as long as I don't think about it. I'm talking to myself, too. Maya giggled and then stopped talking. Her laughter seemed to linger in the room for a while longer, playing on my nerves. But after a couple seconds, she found herself in silence again. May was 17 years old, or rather, had turned 17 not too long ago. She was studying at the International College of Information Technology. Tall for her age, not tall, but tall. Fragile build, flat chest, narrow shoulders, little muscle mass, classically thin, hard to gain weight. Maya had never particularly liked her figure, but overall she thought she was quite pretty. Her hair was nice, blonde, natural, healthy. Carefully cut golden, like molten gold, a real treasure. And her eyes were beautiful, either light green or blue. Maya may not have thought herself particularly beautiful, but harmonious and foldable for sure. She covered her eyes. It was probably a silly statement now, but she thought she was probably not stupid. Stubborn and hard-working. Maya had liked to think that way at first. Now she just didn't have the energy. She had every reason to. She was born into a large family, was the second daughter and 4th child. But by the time she left her father's house, there were already 10 children in the family. Her family lived in a small village, and they basically lived by 2 principles. Rich with what we have, and we live with what we have gotten ourselves. And also, according to the classic in this list, did not live richly, there is nothing to start. The parents had the whole life of their children lined up, and most of them obeyed. Maya's brothers and sisters in general quickly understood how to do and how not to do. There was no need to argue. No one had an opinion of their own, and the main thing was only to obey and serve for the good of the family, no matter how old-fashioned it sounded. Work, 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 work. When Maya said she was going to the city to write screenplays, it was a huge scandal. "You're not getting a dime from us," Father declared. "Only work that's useful is necessary. Writing stupid scripts for stupid movies? Only clowns do that. I'd rather dabble and be a clown than kill myself and my health here," Maya declared. Her mother, a thin, sickly woman, exhausted by hard labor and incessant childbirth, stood silently behind her father, who looked not so much angry as dumbfounded. None of the children, not even the older sons, were so bold as to defy him, to go against his will and disobedience. His daughter was knocking him out. "If you cross the threshold of this house now, you may not come back," the man said harshly. "You won't have a home, you won't have a family. We will never help you even if you beg." "Maya," Mom sobbed. "Please, my daughter." For a second Maya hesitated. So this was it. Was it worth it? To give up her life, hard but clear and logical, predictable, which did not promise any traumatic turns, to abandon it and leave virtually nowhere like that? To live in a dormitory, to work for a meager salary, to study at the same time? Isn't that too much to take on? No, the mind stubbornly objected, and the thought was like a slap in the face. What was Maya thinking? This was her plan, her dream that deserved to be fulfilled. She had graduated high school with honors, had done amazingly on her college entrance tests, and she deserved to make her dream a reality. No one is handing her wish on a silver platter. You have to work, you have to study, you have to labor, and you have to take risks. "I'm sorry," she mumbled. Her father's face relaxed. Her mother frantically exhaled in relief, but Maya only stubbornly clutched the strap of the backpack she'd left the house with. "But I have to do this." Her father said nothing more to her. Her mother squeaked something, but her husband interrupted her with a word of his own. She had made up her mind. Leave it. left her father's house. For a moment it even seemed to her that her father involuntarily respected her for the firmness and riskiness of her decisions. But he could never forgive her. Some of her older siblings contacted her during that year, but she never heard from her mother or father. When she entered college, she met 3 girls from the same school but from different majors, who were also from out of town. The 4 of them rented a rather modest but well-located apartment. It had 3 small rooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. Of course, without a dishwasher and a bathtub, and there was no elevator. But one could hardly hope for luxurious conditions in her first apartment. Maya's room was tiny, but it had a window and a built-in closet. All in all, it was just what was needed. Not just her first adult accommodation, but overall a personal space that she had never had at all. 12 people in a village house. What kind of personal space could there be? Maya felt grown up, very grown up. No one helped her with money, of course. In fact, it was partly because of this that Maya found herself in this situation. Without much education, forced to go to school. She had only one way out, to get a job as a cleaner. Although no, a junior sanitation worker. That's what her job title was. 2 of her 3 employers preferred to call it that. Maya had nothing against it. Her parents, with their patriarchal attitudes, were convinced that a girl had the right to not be able to scrub floors and generally do household chores only in one case, if she was a boy. If not, she is obliged to be able to do everything a woman should be able to do, and to do it perfectly. Therefore, a diligent young active girl in the role of a cleaner received still not bad. Maya was lucky somehow, and all 3 of her employers turned out to be very generous people. Maya wasn't sure what to call it. Correctly assessing the efforts of the young worker, they made bonuses, increased the bonus, and in general encouraged her financially in every possible way. And so her 3rd part-time job had been the evening shift at Golden Age. Maya remembered that her first thought when she first went there was that she wouldn't like it, and nothing good was waiting for her. But the employers had promised to pay well, to start a new job. She worked 16 hours a week. The firm's office had its own cleaners for each floor, but they needed a separate cleaner to scrub the 3 large conference rooms. Not just the floors, but the furniture, clean the desk, all surfaces, the carpet. They always had special cleaning supplies. Perhaps the floor cleaners wouldn't mind cleaning the halls themselves, but they were all grandmothers in their 60s. They lacked the dexterity and skill to wipe down the tall television screens, steam the long curtains. Maya did her job and didn't complain. Physical labor hadn't intimidated her since childhood. Maya wasn't sure what kind of firm Golden Age was. It seemed like the firm specialized in money, and at first Maya thought it was some sort of private bank or something. Then, after a couple of months on the job, she figured out that Golden was a financial institution providing some sort of financial market service under the license of extending credit, loans, selling securities, financial management, and any other money-related transactions. Golden had 3 branches in different cities, and they were all run by the same Grage family. The founders of the business lived in another city, and this relatively new branch was in the hands of their son Leroy. Maya saw a glimpse of him when she was working. He's a regular guy. You wouldn't think he was some rich heir on the street. Tall, rather handsome, with a nose, with and pronounced dark brown hair, with a boyishly cheerful smile. He joked a lot, laughing loudly, attracting attention. Leroy was a real soul of the company and everyone's favorite. And, as Maya had heard, he was not the worst leader. His youth, of course, sometimes hindered him, but he was stubborn and diligent. She and Leroy crossed paths a couple times in the hallways. Most often when the meeting in the conference room was over, where Maya was supposed to clean up. Leroy always invariably nodded politely, saying hello. He was generally polite to employees. Maya responded in kind. And there were no particular interactions or problems. Maya quietly did her job, got her money, and left. And when she crossed the threshold, the Golden Age firm no longer existed in her mind. Likewise, she had come to clean up after another meeting. She saw that the directors and other important men had already left the room. Maya didn't see Leroy among them, but assumed she hadn't seen him leave, so she picked up all her tools and headed into the hall. She hadn't expected to see anyone there. She flinched when she heard the unexpected question. "I've been meaning to ask you if it's heavy for you to carry all this stuff." "Shit," Maya whispered and jerked back, glaring at Leroy. The young man smiled a little guiltily. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm sorry, Mr. Leroy. I thought everyone had already left. She remained awkwardly silent. Maya expected him to leave, but Leroy didn't seem to be in any hurry. Should I come back later? No, you go ahead. I'll take a little break and then I'll go too. Leroy sighed. Maya shrugged, tied her hair tighter, put on gloves. Leroy sat on the windowsill and glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. Maya usually worked with headphones on, but now she thought it impolite, so she went to work in silence. You still haven't told me if all this stuff is heavy or not? I have a cart on wheels, so it's not heavy. Maya answered. Leroy mumbled something in agreement. Maya unfolded the ladder to go up to the air conditioner, wipe it, and for some reason asked, Rough day? No harder than usual. Leroy sighed. More like a difficult week. Projects. Leroy shook his head. You know how it is? Several deadlines at once. Leroy cut himself short, apparently thinking that Maya didn't know what he was talking about. But she grinned. I used to do that when there were several banquets in a row in 2 restaurants where I worked, and after cleaning one room I ran almost to the other side of town to clean the second one. And then I'd take notes. Maya giggled. God, she thought to herself, what nonsense you're telling him. I don't think he'd be interested. But Leroy nodded thoughtfully. Now he was looking at Maya appraisingly, sliding his gaze smoothly over her, studying her. Usually such looks made Maya tense. There were sometimes people in restaurants who gave her unpleasant glances that made Maya want to go back to her little house in the safe village where everyone knew each other. But Leroy's gaze was evaluating, but not as nasty. The guy looked the way he looked at a girl he liked, a pretty girl. Can I use your name? Leroy asked, looking at Maya openly. I'm usually on a first-name basis to all employees, but I want to complain a little. Sure you can. Maya smiled. But then I can be on your first name too? You can. Leroy nodded and smiled absently as well. About the difficult week. My parents found me a bride. Found a bride? Maya hummed, checking to make sure she'd thoroughly dusted off the air conditioner and carefully sliding downstairs. I don't want to offend you, but I thought that was common in the Middle Ages. It's not uncommon now either. Leroy sighed. Especially when the price tag is a few million. A few million? Who should I marry? Let me do it. Maya blurted out and laughed. And Leroy laughed with the bitterness of his situation. Leroy was probably just too lonely. Someone had to listen to him and support him. Someone who had nothing to do with their business. Someone far removed from what rich people did to preserve and strengthen their business. Leroy himself would have been ready to laugh at the comicality of the situation. He's marrying for convenience in the 21st century. But wasn't it funny? Turns out it wasn't. It was not a joke, but a very real reality. I'm marrying the daughter of a major stockholder. Is she good-looking? Maya asked in a businesslike manner, and Leroy noted her odd way of speaking, as if she herself were out of place or stupid. She's very pretty and educated. He exhaled, looking down through the window. Refined, graceful. Loves the theater, always dresses well and smells good. Then I'm sorry, but I don't see the problem, Maya said cynically, picking up the chairs from the carpet and noting that it wasn't as stained today as it usually is. The rich hottie realizes that you probably don't like her very much. But I've always found it easier for guys to come to terms with an imposed marriage than girls. She wasn't just saying that. She was speaking from experience. Her 2 older brothers had married at their father's behest, and while little Maya watched their brides, who were whiter than chalk with excitement, she noted how calm her brothers were. To them it was simply a transaction that helped the family, brought new female workers into the household, help for their mother. It was not the men who went to another man's family at the behest of another man. They were not the ones painfully parting with their childhood, and in most cases they were not the ones who had to be malleable, compliant. So perhaps wrongly Maya, with her 16-year-old maximalism, thought it was a bit unmanly for men to complain about a marriage of convenience. Leroy, however, looked puzzled. Well, you know, marriage without desire isn't very pleasant for us either. Well, at least if there's any honor in it. I am not a man of the highest morals, but I don't want to offend my future wife with affairs and adultery, My fiancée is not a bad person. Maybe a little capricious, infantile, but she's smart, beautiful. What else do you need? Are you going to go out and cheat? Leroy looked at her, and that was the most eloquent answer. Maya didn't know why, but at that moment she found it interesting. Leroy lived in a world that was the exact opposite of her own world that she had escaped from. Her father would have called it lecherous and dirty, and maybe it was. But it seemed free to Maya, much more free than the world she lived in. Or maybe the difference was their situation, their material wealth. But either way, the truth was that in that moment, both Leroy and the world he existed in outside this room seemed tantalizing and intriguing to Maya. As if catching her thoughts, Leroy smiled mirthlessly. It may sound silly, but I'm not quite there yet. I want to live without all these obligations in the free world. Leroy looked at her defiantly. Maya wanted to answer him, but she didn't know what. So she shrugged indifferently. One way or another, she shouldn't have cared about Leroy and his suffering. What did they have to do with her? But at the same time, she realized that there was no one else to tell him. And perhaps mistakenly, she thought that even an interlocutor like her was better than no interlocutor at all. When you talk through your problems, it's always easier than when you silently think them over in your head 100 times by yourself. So explain to your parents, take another walk, Maya declared. And when Leroy tried to interrupt her, she shook her head. A couple of her golden strands of hair fell over her face and she blew them out of the way. She suddenly caught herself thinking that it was so easy to talk to Leroy like this. Very easy, as if they had known each other for a long time. I mean, don't completely give up on the wedding or anything, but just ask her to wait a bit and go on a break. Well, a decent one. Maya shrugged awkwardly. You've probably got the family image and everything. Family image? Yeah, Leroy agreed. And then his eyes suddenly glittered with a strange light. You don't want to accidentally go out with me, do you? He was 4 years older than her. Maya understood well what Leroy was suggesting to her. At first, the offer angered her, and she was quick to express to Leroy that she was neither a prostitute nor a girl for fun, and he could go as far as possible with such offers. Her father would probably forgive her for such a speech and accept her back into the family. He had often said that men were inherently lecherous and girls needed to guard against them and be steadfast. But Leroy was probably partly a lecherous man. But Maya suddenly discovered that he wasn't a bad man. Yes, a little spoiled, a little arrogant. But that's an expense. He is quite courteous, intelligent, educated. Maya quickly realized why he was so attracted to her. Her mother liked to say that her daughter was good at reading other people's hearts. And the family was even willing to make some concessions and let her become a psychologist, preferably a family therapist. Keeping families together is such a noble thing to do. But Maya chose the path she chose, and things happened the way they did. But this skill of hers, or her gut, or whatever it might have been, helped a lot in her attitude towards Leroy. She could see perfectly well that the only reason he'd latched onto her was because of where she'd ended up in that hall back then. Maya listened to him, didn't judge him, gave him advice. And Leroy wanted to prolong that feeling of not being alone, that feeling of togetherness. In his, and in her defense too, he was polite, graceful, unobtrusive. There were no dirty innuendos, no vulgar jokes or awkward moments, just words being exchanged. Leroy began to linger around her more, deliberately slow to leave the conference room. Chocolate, flowers, small gifts, not too expensive, began to appear in the small back room. He was neat and precise in his signs of attention. Some of his gifts were funny in how useful they were. A set of nice dishes, gift coupons to a store for inexpensive but nice clothes. He found out she was studying to be a screenwriter and gave her some very useful and interesting books. And Maya. Yeah, she gave in. Wanted to feel like a princess being courted by a prince. Living in the city had thrown off her shackles a bit, and she was taking both herself and some of her questionable decisions more easily. Perhaps she had rushed into a closer relationship with Leroy, but she suddenly wanted it so badly. She liked him. But to her further relief, she hadn't truly fallen in love with him. Leroy hadn't promised her anything, and the two of them understood what was involved and why. They were together and didn't expect anything more than that. Pleasant communication, a little bit of understanding, a slight sympathy similar to friendship, a pleasant, tender, sensual first experience of Maya. She didn't regret anything, and was glad to be close to such an actually good person. Her parents had built it all from the ground up, told her Leroy on one of their evenings together. They had nothing in their childhood, just dreams and plans that just became reality. We're a pretty young firm, still not as solid as we'd like to be, and your marriage to the daughter of a big partner gives you support, Maya guessed. Leroy nodded. Maya shrugged. You're a good son. Besides, you need it too. After all, you don't need money either. Believe me, someone who hardly has any. You're right. He nodded. Money's important, but it's my parents' diligence that's more important to me. They know I'll do the right thing. That's why they turn a blind eye to some of my failures. Not being serious. Maya didn't know if the brief connection with her was a blunder or a non-seriousness. She decided not to specify what the point was. Soon their little adventure was going to end, and it was as if Leroy felt some sort of guilt towards her, even though Maya wasn't expecting or asking for anything. For her birthday, Leroy had given her a perhaps too large parting gift. Tuition money. A sum she immediately deposited with interest, and exhaled. Of course, the word immediately was an exaggeration. She tried to refuse. I'm not a prostitute after all, she muttered angrily as Leroy continued to shove the congratulatory envelope at her insistently. I can't take that much. Don't buy me, I don't need anything. God, what's that got to do with it? Exhaled Leroy. Cashing out his account to give Maya a gift, he expected her to hesitate and refuse. So confident in herself and her abilities in some matters, uncompromising, hard-working, she represented an amazing set of moral qualities. They didn't show up everywhere, but in some convictions, Maya was solid as a rock. I'm not trying to buy you, just giving you a gift for a friend. Maya looked at him warily from under her golden bangs, and Leroy sighed heavily. Even though talking to Maya had been easy and simple, right now he was just lost. In the short 4 months they'd been together and close, it was as if Maya had opened up a new facet of him, a new part of his heart and soul. Not that it was very big, but very important. And it was as if Leroy could breathe easier. You've just been so helpful. I know I'm not the guy you deserve. Or for that matter, nobody at all. But I had such a good time with you on our little adventure. You've made me feel better about myself. You've made me see things differently. It was easier to breathe, you know. And at that moment the 20-year-old Leroy blushed a little awkwardly. But Maya didn't laugh at his embarrassment, and he, noting it gratefully in his thoughts, continued. And I think we're at least friends or comrades, and I want to give you a gift as a friend, but to make life a little easier for you, so to speak, just as you do for me. Please accept it. He gently placed the envelope in her hand, and Maya took it. Leroy smiled and kissed her cheek gratefully. Thank you for everything. And now that it had been almost 2 months since they'd said goodbye, it turned out, geez, that the parting gift wasn't just money from the envelope. Maya was pregnant. God, how awful. She's only 17 and she's pregnant. Her father and mother would be devastated at the news. How could this have happened? Maya was a girl. Leroy was her first boyfriend. But he'd always used protection and made sure there were no repercussions from their liaisons. He'd even watched her for a while. Maya stayed at her job at Golden, but they rarely spoke to Leroy now. He was completely preoccupied with the wedding preparations, and Maya was only glad that such a good man, as it seemed, began to take it easier about the way their fate had turned out. Между ними не было неловкости, если они сталкивались в коридорах или Лерой что-то доделывал на работе, пока Майя убирала конференц-зал, или если они сталкивались в коридоре. Leroy was unfailingly polite and friendly. He might even drop a joke or two, but overall, their relationship was back to where it had started. Maya had no regrets. The past relationship was a warm memory. Besides, Leroy with his gift really made her life easier, and she lived on. She was breathing easier after that affair too. And now this. A baby. What to do? What to do now? Those 2 questions were running around in her head, but she couldn't come up with any ideas. As Maya stared dumbly at the test results, her brain seemed to cease to exist. Maya was alternately struck by a terrible panic, then a sticky fear, then nausea from excitement, then the range of emotions was enormous.
Maya seemed to be experiencing something resembling a panic attack, but after a couple minutes she was nearly shattered by hysterical laughter. "That's it, Maya," she said loudly, glad that the neighbors, all as one, were absent at this moment in the small apartment. "Career. So much for career. From a mother who gave birth at 15, and you're not that far behind in years." She was silent, and again she felt the anxiety, that nasty feeling gripped every organ like a squeeze. "What am I supposed to do now?" Maya muttered. Talking out loud suddenly calmed her, helped her gather her thoughts and assess the situation. Maya touched her stomach with her fingertips. The thought of abortion appeared and immediately disappeared.
Maya pressed her lips together stubbornly. No, it definitely wouldn't happen. Sin is not sin. Murder, not murder. But she wasn't going to do it. And she'd realized that as soon as the test had shown 2 bars, notifying her of her new position. Besides, she's only 17. Maya wasn't a pregnancy expert, of course, but she wasn't stupid. She knew perfectly well that an underage pregnant girl 17 and under needed the consent of her parents or guardians to terminate such a pregnancy. If her parents found out about the baby, she'd be in big trouble. She'll be twisted in her arms and legs and returned to the village. And there hang around the neck of her parents with a shameful stigma, until her father will hardly get her to marry someone, or worse, will hurry to marry off his pregnant daughter at once, so that the child can be assigned to her husband, probably to a local young potential alcoholic. A bleak and horrible prospect. But Maya was not going to have an abortion. There wasn't any particular reason. She just wasn't going to have an abortion, that's all. Once that question was settled in her mind, Maya relaxed, threw the test in the trash, washed her face, and went into the kitchen to make herself some tea. So she was pregnant, and she was keeping the baby. Her next step was obviously going to be a visit to the hospital. There might not be a pregnancy after all. She continued to ponder aloud. It happens. But what a good lesson it would be for me. It would be a good lesson indeed, and she hurriedly made an appointment. But the thoughts kept running through her head. Well, let's say she's not pregnant. Then she would just laugh at this funny situation that nearly drove her to a fatal fainting spell. Then it would be her own personal nightmare. That's it. And if she's pregnant, what should she do then? Should I tell Leroy or not? Does he need to? Or will she just ruin his life by telling him? What do we do in such a situation? Stop panicking, she said to herself. It's not going to make you feel any better, Maya. You need to find out for sure. That's it. The lesson didn't work. Or it did, but it wasn't a very good one. A formidable-looking woman in a white coat looked at Maya with an undecipherable gaze and told her that she was 4 weeks pregnant. Unexpected. Maya felt almost nothing from this not new news. No shock, no particular fright or disappointment. But neither did she feel joy. She didn't even try to convince herself that she wasn't pregnant. Somehow getting used to the idea and accepting it now was easy enough. But accepting it didn't mean figuring out what to do. Maya took a week off to think about it. Savings allowed, and employers went to the usually hard-working girl to meet her needs. It was enough time to settle some things, such as with the police. They were obliged to inform the parents that their underage daughter was pregnant, and there was nothing Maya could do about it. She explained that no one had raped her, that the liaison had been consensual, and that sort of settled the matter. Then she went to college. More precisely, she was almost forcibly shoved out of there by her roommates. Maya was surprised. Her roommates, though quite friendly and understanding, didn't usually show this much interest in her. Come on, they urged. We have to warn her. And either on distance learning or in the academic. You're an excellent student. You will not rest. And you and the baby need rest. And you need to quit your job. You're always carrying heavy things. Yeah, and what am I going to live on? Maya exhaled tiredly. But she went to college. Her new position really needed to be announced because it could cause even more problems. It was better to settle things on her own. We'll decide there, one of her roommates declared, sliding her fingers quickly across the touch screen of her phone. The college listened to her, wondering if it was mutual or if she needed help going to the police. She'd just turned 17 after all. The scoundrel had actually committed a crime. Maya only smiled indulgently. This was definitely not her way. She refused, and without further questions, she was helped to build a plan of action. "While you can, study," said the vice principal for academic affairs. "You'll have time to pass this session. Summer is soon, after all, and then we'll see. You'll be able to walk for a while, and when it comes to childbirth, you'll switch to distance learning. Temporarily, or you can just hand in your assignments like distance learners. We'll decide." "Thank you," Maya said sincerely, feeling really moved. She didn't know many people in their small college. She worked a lot and studied even more. And somehow the warmth and responsiveness of a stranger touched her to the core. The vice principal patted her hand embarrassedly. "Come on, it's nothing. Weren't you young yourself?" The woman sighed. "Study for now. Get ready. Being a mom is not an easy thing. We'll solve problems as we go along, and that asshole should have his genitals cut off so he knows how to protect himself." And she laughed bitterly. It was too bitter for Maya's taste, and too much personal in this woman's laugh. But she didn't ask, of course. One way or another, the college problem was solved. At work too, in her situation entered into her situation, offered to work while she can, and further on the state of health will be looked at. The director of one of the restaurants even personally checked all her equipment and allocated a large cart to carry a bucket of water and rags, and asked the staff to make sure that Maya did not lift heavy things. In the second restaurant, she began to offer to move better to the position of waitress, but there too sometimes it was necessary to lift heavy trays. And Maya refused. "So far you can work like this, and what will happen next, we'll see." After learning about her daughter's pregnancy, her parents sent letters. Apparently she was not worthy of even a phone call. Maya looked at the letter as if it could cause her physical pain. For long minutes she hesitated to open it, even though deep down she knew what it might say. Of course, once she was pregnant, there was no turning back for her. Or if there was, it promised only thorny thickets. She expected neither support nor approval, but when she opened the letter she was unexpectedly surprised by its contents. Her parents condemned the fact that she had entered into an affair with a man without marriage. They wrote that the city had perverted her and brought out the worst of her soul, but praised her willingness to keep this child. "No matter what anyone says, abortion is murder." The father wrote, "It's your cross to bear, your lost youth. And you chose to accept it and carry it with dignity. It's an act that deserves respect. Nothing more." Her mother sent her a small amount of money, Maya realized, secretly from her father. Her mother had her own small stockpile with a small note. For a grandchild. And for some reason, Maya felt lighter in her heart. Perhaps one day they would even make up again. When she had a child, she would have to go to her family. And now at least she knew what surname and patronymic she would give her son. But what to do with the child's father, whether to tell him or not? Does Leroy need to know? He definitely has a right to know he's having a baby, but what if she makes it worse? He has a wedding in a couple days. He can dislike this marriage and dislike his wife all he wants, but his family needs this, and that's her. And on the other hand, he has a right to know it's his child. Quite embarrassed, Maya did what every girl would do in a similar situation. Turned to the other woman, in her case a neighbor, one of the four, or rather Catherine, who was the oldest. "Tell him," shrugged her shoulders. They didn't know the details of Maya's story, only in general terms. And Maya hoped that would be enough to get some advice. He's not likely to be your boyfriend, your husband, but he could be a good father to a child. You tell him, and what he decides is up to him. In general, the advice was logical, and Maya decided that was what she would do. But she couldn't get in touch with Leroy. He wasn't in the office right now, and neither were his parents, and she couldn't ask the deputy for his phone number. Some cleaning lady wouldn't be given the personal number of the heir to a financial company, and it was unwise to go into details. And somehow, slowly, she came to one single option. She needed to get to the wedding. A crazy decision, but the only one possible if she wanted to do the right thing. All right, she'd say it, and it would be up to her. Where the wedding was going to take place was well known to her, and probably to the rest of the town as well. Maya spent a couple of days in anxious anticipation, and on the day of X, she packed up and went to the celebration. So that she wouldn't be thrown out right away, She studied several news channels and tried to dress the way reporters looked at such events so that she could pass for a prominent journalist. She did manage to get lost among the guests at the big reception. From afar, she saw Leroy. He was very handsome, in his wedding suit, smiling at the guests, embracing his beautiful bride. The girl was indeed pretty in her exquisitely beautiful dress. Blonde-haired, the skin on her face was so delicate, transparent, and from behind long dark lashes smiled a pair of dark blue proud eyes. For a moment Maya bitterly felt like a little mermaid watching the wedding of a prince and princess, and holding a sharp dagger that she must drive into the prince's heart. Maya stood there wondering if she could do it. Mrs. Alexandra walked past her, a stately, beautiful woman in a green velvet dress, Leroy's mother. Maya watched as she stepped out to get some fresh air, obviously, and headed after her. She'd seen Alexandra a couple of times, but they hadn't spoken, and it was unlikely Alexandra would have recognized her when they met. But Maya suddenly decided it would be easier to talk to her first. The hell of it tugged at her. The woman stood off to the side, looking into the distance, as if searching there for some answers to difficult questions. Maya coughed politely, alerting her presence, and Alexandra turned to her, looking at her with polite interest. "Good evening." "Good evening," nodded Alexandra, passing her an assessing glance. Maya was wearing a blue sweater and a black knee-length skirt and knee-high black boots. "What newsroom are you from? I've already given some comments to specialized publications, and I don't think so." "No, I'm sorry, Mrs. Alexandra." Maya interrupted her gently. "I'm not a journalist. I worked for you cleaning conference rooms some time ago in Leroy's office. But I don't think now is the right time," Alexandra said patiently. But there wasn't an ounce of recognition in her eyes. Maya shook her head. "That's not the point. A few months ago I had a brief affair with your son. A brief affair. And now I'm expecting a child." "Yeah. Oh no, not this sensation." Again, Maya froze. Alexandra wrinkled her nose like a headache and gave Maya a scornful look. Unlike the other glances, this one was full of contempt and squeamishness, which Alexandra didn't even hide. Maya felt as if she had been stabbed with a sharp blade. The intonation and the whole expression of Alexandra's face clearly embarrassed her, and all the prepared words slipped out of Maya's mind. She had expected screams, scandals, something else, but not like this. Not some strange weariness on Alexandra's face. Maya was so dumbfounded that she couldn't let out anything but a wheeze. "I'm sorry, girl," Alexandra pronounced, and in her voice she sounded something like sincere sympathy. However, the squeamishness in her eyes did not diminish. It was an even more humiliating mixture. You'd think of something more interesting, I don't know. Though what could be more interesting than pregnancy, right? Maya shuddered. The picture hadn't yet formed in her mind, but it was slowly emerging. And it was disappointing. But Maya wasn't going to get caught up in her thoughts. She shook her head and tried again, giving herself the confidence that had almost slipped away. "I don't know what you mean." "Really? Do you know how many people like you tell me and my husband, and more often Leroy directly, that he's supposedly about to have a baby?" Alexandra exhaled, and Maya was dumbfounded and silent again. She supposed she wasn't the first or the last, and in the moment, probably not even the only one. And she wasn't going to not be offended or jealous. She wouldn't have minded staying friends with Leroy. They might not have had a future, but such a thing. And that phrase from Alexandra almost sent Maya into hysterical laughter. She was afraid to talk about pregnancy for many reasons, but she hadn't expected to hear something so absurd and funny. The first three we still believed. One turned out not to be pregnant at all. The other two were carrying children, but not my sons. Leroy likes girls. What can you do? Alexandra pressed her lips tighter, so that they looked like two thin pink strings. After a moment she closed them again and spoke. "I'm not lying," Maya said calmly and firmly, realizing in her heart that she wouldn't get anywhere. Alexandra didn't believe her. She had reason to. Maya wasn't even offended. "You could very well be pregnant." Alexandra nodded, running her eyes over the girl's loose clothing, which nevertheless did not hide her slimness. "And you could very well be having an affair with my son, especially if you worked for us. But he's getting married today." She cut her off sternly. "To a girl who will benefit him and his family, who will strengthen our small empire. Not to a poor girl like you who is materially poor, or maybe just insulted that she didn't pick up a rich guy. There are few beggars who dream of rising at the expense of my son and our family. And everyone's going to be telling pregnancy stories. Of course they do. You're wrong, Maya said, adjusting the hem of her skirt. Alexandra looked at her without any particular expression. You're wrong. I'm not going to prove anything to you. Just know that you will have a grandchild after all. And she headed in the other direction from the place of celebration. Take care of yourself, girl, Alexandra shouted after her. Take care of your life. Study, work. Don't try to become a fraud. And when the girl's blue sweater disappeared around the corner, Alexandra exhaled heavily. Her heart suddenly felt strangely compressed and relaxed. A stroke is all I need, she thought wistfully. Mom! Leroy's concerned voice came from outside. The young man came over and gently held his mother's elbow. What's wrong? Are you sick? Come, sit down and drink some water. Thank you, my son, rastrously said Alexandra, not hurriedly, going under the arm with her son to the other guests. What a good son she had. And how can you make him go through such a nervousness again because of a girl who wanted to improve her financial situation in an easy way? You can't. You can't. Who was that with you? Leroy asked calmly. And the mother's heart noted with longing that there was no joy in the groom's gaze. Who were you talking to? No one, son. Alexandra exhaled. No one. Maya wouldn't be herself if she gave up. Curiously, the conversation with Alexandra had only made her more confident in her decision. Let no one believe in us, Maya thought, stroking her belly. Let them. And we will do everything and cope with everything. The conversation left a little bitterness behind, but Maya quickly got over it. This was no time to be sad and feel sorry for herself. The next months of her life were full of major and minor domestic problems. The landlady of the apartment where they rented a room gently explained that she did not need an apartment with children, and it would be good if Maya moved out before the birth. This news had not settled in Maya's mind, and she hadn't even made a plan of action when Catherine and the other girls shocked her with another one. We've given the college money to help you get started, Catherine said, handing Maya a puffy envelope. And one of the guys found you an apartment. His great-uncle lives abroad and agrees to rent to decent tenants only for the communal rent. And you're a decent lady. We've already paid the first installment. And then I think you'll manage on your own. But we're not leaving you behind. Thanks, but... No buts. Catherine interrupted her imperiously, and Maya obediently closed her mouth, feeling tears welling up in her eyes with gratitude. It's a drop in the ocean, of course. But what mattered was not how much you did, but how much love you put into your work. Even the most modest help, but with a lot of love. There are many of us students. A couple of times we'll give a little. We won't be poor. Everyone can find themselves in a difficult situation. We're all human beings. And as human beings, we should help our neighbors. And she kissed Maya patronizingly on the forehead. Maya even sobbed. Why did she get such good people in her life? And then her ordinary everyday life went on. They would be no different from what was before Leroy and before the connection with him. If only now Maya didn't have to go to the hospital and make sure she didn't lift anything heavy. She endured for a while longer at Golden, but when her situation became more apparent, and when Alexandra saw her again, she was calculated and fired, paying 3 paychecks without even giving her the time she was supposed to work. Maya used the money to buy some things for the newborn. But something comes and something goes, and soon after her dismissal, Maya was hired to work at her own college, dealing with paperwork, reports, certificates. Not hard work, but not badly paid. And closer to school, much closer. Studying got a lot easier. The guys continued to help her little by little, to bring and let already used, but good things for the child. A crib, diapers, a table, a bathtub. For the first year of the child's life, she was provided with almost everything. And then, almost on the same day, according to doctors' predictions, she gave birth to a boy. She had such a big belly at the last term, or it just seemed that way against her skinny body. But Maya thought her baby would be big, and the boy was born small, petite, dainty. To his mother's relief, he looked almost nothing like his father. He had the features of Maya's father. Light golden hair, and maybe only his eyes gave him away as Leroy's son. Too attentive and tenacious. Maya named the baby Alex. So Maya's life had a new meaning, small and huge at the same time. After her dismissal from the company, she didn't take much interest in Golden's fate. Of course, some news didn't pass her by. Company expansion, a successful union, a beautiful wife, a husband showing up at some events without his young wife. All of this news was passing through, and Maya only had time for a fleeting thought. I hope all is well with him and he can be happy. Neither love-longing nor bitterness of resentment she felt. Maybe only a slight sadness. She wanted to be Leroy's friend. But it happened the way it happened, and Maya didn't regret it. Alex had had a small illness at birth, so their discharge was a little delayed. Maya's friends and just a few fellow students had visited before then, so she wasn't really expecting anyone for the discharge. Catherine and her boyfriend arrived in the early morning, congratulated her again, and took some things away, and Maya had to wait until lunchtime to go home. Alex himself was lurching in a huge blanket, looking at the world with his eyes, and Maya was smiling at him fondly. There you go, baby. Soon you'll see your first home. You already have your own room, can you imagine? Alex squeaked something in agreement, not opening the peephole. Maya carefully covered his face with a light veil, sewn into a blanket, so that the sun would not blind the baby. And she couldn't resist admiring her son once again. She didn't understand much about babies, but for some reason everyone called him beautiful. And Maya, as a good mother, was ready to take it on faith. A beautiful baby indeed. When she was leaving with this charming little bundle, several cars pulled up to the threshold of the maternity hospital. Maya stood aside, thinking that it was the wife or some other relative of some important person, and walked slowly to the edge of the stairs, not wanting to disturb her. But then the door of the first car opened, and a woman got out. Maya did not recognize her at once. Maya, hello? I recognized you at once. Mrs. Alexandra nodded and smiled at her. Maya didn't take to judging how sincere that smile was. She just froze at the bottom of the stairs, looking at Mrs. Alexandra. A man came out from the other side of the car, and after a couple of moments, Maya recognized him as Alexandra's husband, Boris. Maya. Boris nodded to her, as did his spouse. He was holding a bouquet of bright red roses. Maya was so dumbfounded by what was happening that she stopped like dumbfounded. Congratulations. Boris nodded, carefully placing the bouquet in Maya's hands. The young mother grabbed the bouquet, supporting the child. Boris took the opportunity and slightly inclined his head toward the baby, politely trying to look into his face. And Maya automatically turned her son, allowing her to look at him. Alex was sucking a funny pacifier labeled Mommy's Joy, and looked at Boris with his serious eyes, his son's eyes. Congratulations again, Boris said solemnly. I hope the boy is healthy. Yes, thank you, Maya finally answered, managing to cope with her surprise. Alex is completely healthy. Alex? Alexandra smiled strainedly. Alexander, then. She looked at her spouse for some reason. Not a bad name. And then Maya suddenly realized why they had come. She didn't know what had happened in their family, why they were here, why they needed her son. And a real rage rose in her soul. She had accepted their decision, their rejection, and she was going to live without them, raising a child. And now they had come and tried to invade her ideal world for some reason. Not just to move in, to squeeze in without asking, to be where they were not expected to be. That made them feel alien and hostile. Maya pulled herself together and held her son close to her. She suddenly seemed much older to herself. No, she said calmly, but firmly and firmly. Alexandra's lips tightened familiarly. Boris's face turned cold. Like Maya herself, they prepared for a fight. His name is Alex. He has my last name and my father's middle name. Maya, Boris said. This boy is our grandson. You weren't so sure of that 8 months ago, but now you are. Boris smiled thinly, and there was a frightening resemblance between him and his wife. Maya felt more and more uncomfortable. With money you can be sure of many things. I don't doubt it, Maya said coldly. Alexandra pretended as if she hadn't said anything. "We haven't let you out of our sight for the last couple of months. We didn't believe you at first. But don't blame us so much. Beggars dream of rising at the expense of your son and your family, and everyone will tell tales of pregnancy. Of course they will. Yes, I remember. Maya cut me off hard. Why would you choose to believe me now?" They were silent for a few more minutes. Looking at the baby, Alexandra turned pale, and Boris's face became even more cruel and detached than before. Maya pulled the baby more tightly to her, feeling some kind of completely unfamiliar and rational panic, wanting to clutch Alex as tightly to her as she could and rush to run as far away as possible from these people who were staring at them. So she hadn't really thought about whether she had any maternal instincts in the direct sense of them before, but now she felt it as if some bright torch had flared up inside. Nothing more than the behavior or actions of a mother towards her child for the purpose of protecting and preserving and caring. "Leroy." Finally, gravely, Boris said. Almost immediately after the honeymoon, he was in a car accident. His wife. Boris stiffened his face when he said the word, as if he had seen and even eaten something disgusting. She'd gotten off with a slight scare and some bruises. Leroy wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Went through the windshield. "Oh no," Maya exclaimed in shock, and her heart clenched, a pang of anxiety and consternation. Such events are shocking when you just read or hear about them. But when it happens to someone you know, especially someone you know so well, the father of her child. Startled by the loud sound, Alex cried out. Maya immediately started rocking him. Maya leaned over and kissed her son on the cheek. "Oh my God, is he alive?" she asked excitedly, trying not to raise her voice. "He's alive," Boris said briefly. And in that one word were hidden all the fears and anxieties, worries and strength invested in keeping Leroy alive. Not even healthy, just alive. Maya would not be surprised if it turned out that they had pulled their only son almost from the dead. But he's paralyzed from the waist down. Maybe the son will be able to walk one day, but he won't have children. Maya understood. Her voice trailed off unhappily as the whole picture formed in her head. A horrible picture. She realized why they'd come here. Right. Boris nodded, and that wife of his left right away. "You must have realized where we're going by now. Enough with the words." Through gritted teeth, Alexandra said, "We're after the boy, our grandson." Maya shook with anger. It seemed to her that she was going to either scream at them or silently ram it down their throats. She didn't understand why such a suggestion made her so angry, because she had already realized what they wanted to talk to her about, but she was still dumbfounded. They had come for their grandson, but of course, so she was going to give them her son. No way, let them get out of here. Think about it. Boris interrupted Maya with a commanding wave of his hand. "You're young, you study, you work. You have your whole life ahead of you, hundreds of opportunities. And a child now?" The man shook his head. "You're good for doing this. I respect that. But now we're ready to take on that responsibility. Let us take our grandson in." "Maya." Maya pulled Alex close to her, tugged the blanket a little, covering his face. The baby was already asleep, and Maya even envied him for a second. How nice and easy it was to escape into the world of dreams and fall asleep, to hide under the blanket from the complicated and scary suggestions of these people. Maya didn't have to make a decision. It had been made from the moment she found out about her baby. These people looked like they had no doubt about the decision she would make. Maybe they already had, and were just waiting for her to voice it. Maya closed her lips dry with excitement and gave them her answer. "No." "Maya," Alexandra began harshly. But Maya wouldn't listen to her. "I'm not giving him to you. Alex is my son. I gave birth to him, and I won't let you take him away." "Think carefully," calmly said Boris, covering his wife's shoulder with his hand. Alexandra blushed with irritation. She apparently did not want to come to receive her grandson from an obscure girl, to have all these conversations. For her to come here and talk about taking the child away was to summarize the tragedy, and it meant that she was admitting that her son's life was broken and could never be made whole again. He will never be able to stand on his own 2 feet and walk, and he will absolutely never be able to have children. His continuation lies in this child he accidentally conceived with a 17-year-old college student who works at his parents' company as a janitor. And all of this, every detail of this equation caused her as a mother nothing but monstrous disgust. If it had been another girl, another child, another time, Alexandra would have been the best and happiest grandmother in the world. But this was the way things were happening, and it made her angry and annoyed. We'll give the baby everything she needs. Meanwhile, Boris continued, and we won't abandon you. We won't take Alex away from you at all. All we need is all the rights to the child. Give him to us, his future, and you'll both live well. We'll raise him to be a worthy heir to our cause. The same way you raised Leroy? Maya said coldly. She didn't even know that she could raise him like that. A poor, unloved child whose value was determined only by how useful he was to the family and your empire. Raising a lonely man who rushes from girl to girl just to feel a little bit of love? Shut up, Alexandra replied. You don't know anything about us. Give me the baby. She was ready to lunge at Maya, to tear Alex out of her arms. The girl held her son tighter to her and took a step back. If you come near me, I'll scream. I'll tell them you're trying to steal my son from me. Ladies, let's be reasonable, said Boris calmly and imperiously. He looked at Maya with his cold, glassy eyes. Raise your son yourself if you want, but don't refuse our help either. This is our grandson. We will visit you. And so it was. Boris kept his word. They visited their grandson often. Leroy came too. The sight of that handsome young man in a wheelchair hurt Maya's heart, but she could do nothing to help him. The accident affected Leroy. He became older, quieter, calmer. He visited Maya alone without his parents, accompanied by a large man who was now his driver and secretary, and helped him with his movements. Already later, Maya learned that this huge, broad-shouldered man, a natural closet, was in fact quite a nice and polite man. When Maya gave Alex in her father's arms, a single tear rolled down Leroy's cheek. So that's what you are, he muttered. My son. Now Maya was crying herself. Deputy Leroy was in the kitchen so as not to embarrass them, and they sat and just cried. Only little Alex wasn't crying, looking at the adults with eyes still a little cloudy and greenish in his father. Somehow, with his father and grandparents present, it was palpably easier to ask their family to stay with their grandson. Maya was a little apprehensive, but Leroy was always happy to babysit her son. He would come at the first request, helping out. And in general, he and Maya had a good relationship. Between them there was no burden of the first unhappy love, and they understood each other well. Leroy was even sympathetic to her resolute refusal to put him on the birth certificate. Apparently, he understood as well as she did what his parents were capable of. Several years passed. Maya graduated and continued to work at the college. Of course, now she had more incentive. She had a son, and it was worth working harder and harder for him. So when she was offered a job at a small screenwriting publishing house in her senior year, she jumped at the opportunity. Alex's parents helped, periodically coming to visit her, bringing gifts for her and her grandson. There was no more talk of taking the boy away, so Maya allowed them to communicate. Alex's relatives, after all. But she never took anything for herself. When Alex went to daycare at 2, his mom had just finished her college education. You, Maya, Alex. They both have new adult lives. Leroy laughed as he brought a new bag of stuff for his son. Mother to work, son to daycare. Very funny, Maya muttered. She was spinning in front of the mirror, trying to figure out whether the new skirt suited her or not. Alex was also looking at himself in his new denim overalls. Leroy could hardly contain his laughter. What do you think? She finally asked. All the men are yours. Leroy snorted. Spit. What was I, a bad experience? Now you have a motto, no men? Awkwardly inquired Leroy. Maya looked at him painfully in the reflection of the mirror. Leroy was looking at her with some strange curiosity and concern. Maya smiled softly. Relax, it's not about you. Or rather, it's not really about you. Maya exhaled. But after this adventure, I don't want any relationship at all. I love Alex very much. He's my greatest meaning in life. But one more time. But you don't want to get burned again. Leroy nodded understandingly. Don't worry. You're a beautiful, smart, nice girl. You're bound to meet someone worthy. But what fun we had. Leroy smiled and nodded at Alex, who had already gotten to his mom's phone and was trying to unlock it. At her new job, Maya was combining her position as assistant director and screenwriter. Her work was being recognized and she was moving up the career ladder rather quickly. Leaving her father's house, Maya didn't even think that everything would turn out this way. She did not expect that she would become a young mother. She thought only about her studies and work. And that's how it all happened. Maya did not regret the connection with Leroy, nor the fact that the child was born. Yes, her life had taken an incredibly abrupt turn. But it was even better this way. She had the most important person in her life, her son Alex, who was now 3 years old. There was her son's father, her good and understanding friend Leroy. A favorite job that brought her good money. What else could one expect from life? "Mom, you're so great," Alex declared to her once when she took him to kindergarten. "Really?" Maya laughed softly, sitting down to kiss her son on the cheek. "Yes, yes." Alex nodded seriously, and his cap almost flew off his head. "We were talking to the kids at the daycare center about our parents, who works where, and I said you were a screenwriter. And the kids found that interesting?" "Very much." Alex jumped up and down. "I said you make up new stories for me every time. I'm glad you're proud of me," Maya said seriously. They crossed the road and Alex tugged her sleeve. Maya sat down and he put his arms around her neck. "I'm very proud of you, Mommy," he said. "And I love you very much." "I love you too, son. Could you be happier?" Maya didn't care at all whether she had a boyfriend or not, whether she had a relationship or not. What did it matter? Guys were interested in her, tried to meet her, but Maya refused. And it became quite a joke for Leroy. But he tried not to joke about it too much. He himself ended up behaving just like Maya. Work, son, home, work, work, son, home, and no relationship. Maya thought it would stay that way, and for quite some time. But, as is often the case, fate had other plans. "I'm sending you on a little business trip," her boss told her, "for training. A couple of master classes, different new techniques, you will rise to a new level, and then there will be some festival with foreign guests." Leroy and his family were more than happy to babysit Alex for a couple days, and Maya left him to it, albeit not exactly with a peaceful mind. Leroy promised to send video reports and record messages. Alex promised to be the most obedient boy in the world, and Maya left. The training and master classes were indeed interesting. They involved a lot of practice. That is, the knowledge was reinforced by assignments, and Maya wrote some small scripts. She immediately sent them to her boss, and he chose a couple of options for future work and wished Maya a pleasant vacation at the festival. There, Maya immediately joined the company of young screenwriters who worked abroad and equally young foreigners. Gradually, the conversation turned to personal topics, and Maya mentioned that she had a child. One of the men looked at her. "Do you have a child?" he asked as they stepped aside. The girl was texting back to Leroy how she was doing, and answered more as a machine than in earnest. Leroy sent her a text, seeing Alex bathing, and Maya looked at the boy splashing in the bathtub full of foam. "Yes, boy. Sorry I didn't introduce myself." Immediately the man said and extended his hand to her. "My name is James." "Maya." Maya smiled, shaking his hand in return. Maya took her first look at her companion. He was a tall, very slender man with long legs. Maya could call him handsome. He had delicate hands, calm eyes, and a long, pale face. His amber-colored skin was flawless, and his stiff black hair was cut short. "Where are you from?" "From England," James answered readily. "My ancestors were immigrants, but I went back to my historic homeland, learned the language, and now I'm here again." "You have almost no accent," Maya noticed. "How long have you been living in a language environment?" "Almost 3 years. But I want to go back to my homeland and live there for a while." James sighed. "Yes, as they say, it's good to visit, but home is better." They spent the remaining 2 days of the festival in each other's company, attended a few more events together, and even just went for a walk. James was unexpectedly easy and pleasant to be with. She wasn't restrained by the strange coldness that seemed to freeze every cell of her body when the man was around. He was easy to breathe with. He seemed polite, natural. Maya caught herself thinking that the last person she'd had such an easy time with was Leroy. And at the same time she was bitter to discover that she didn't really have anyone in her social circle except Leroy and old friends, who were mostly girls. And with James? It was different with James. It almost hurt her to leave him. "Look, can I ask you a not polite question?" James asked when they met for breakfast at the hotel where the forum and festival participants were staying. "You can ask. It depends on how impolite it is." "What is your relationship with the baby's father?" James asked. And Maya was surprised to notice that he was embarrassed. She wondered. James invited her for walks. They spent a lot of time together. He'd even given her gifts, and it could be called flirting and dating. Just unobtrusive and very polite. But in other, James made no secret of his almost obvious interest. "Well, we're friends, whatever that sounds like." She laughed, then shook her head. "We had a spontaneous thing going on there. It's a long story in the style of soap operas on television." "Uh-huh." James nodded, stirring his tea. "Then I can, say, come and visit you?" Maya looked at him and really considered the answer before giving it. Did she need this? Was she ready for it? For a new relationship? For a man in her life? Life would change abruptly again. Even if things wouldn't work out between her and James in the future, it was a pretty risky move. "James, me? I don't expect any of that," James said immediately, raising his hands. "But I thought we were having a great time. We're both adults. Why should we deny ourselves any socializing with each other? And it doesn't bother you that I have a kid?" "No, of course not." James smiled. "If Alex has a temper like yours, it'll be even more fun. So can I come visit you?" "Yes," Maya said firmly, not giving herself a chance to think about it again. "You'd be very welcome." She held out her hand to him. James smiled contentedly and kissed her knuckles. A couple days after Maya came home, James did come over. He rented a small apartment in the city, and they saw each other almost every day. James even got to know Leroy, and he got to know Alex. Maya had laughed at them for a few more days afterward, when they'd looked at the potential man in Maya's life with almost equal appraisal. But one and the other had been forced to admit that James was a good man, gallant, punctual, polite. Because of the age difference, Leroy's parents were wary of him, but they weren't about to voice their opinions to Maya. Things went smoothly and romantically for them, not as quickly as they had with Leroy. They moved in together, and James started living with them. Alex eyed him suspiciously at first, but quickly grew to like this new man in his mom's life. Besides, James had a way with people. They married quietly, modestly, 6 months after they met, and after a while, James started talking about how they could go to live in England together. It was easy for Maya to transfer to a remote job, and if she wanted, they could go to another country for a year and a half. Besides, there was the need to get to know James's parents and significant others. And if they liked it, they could stay there forever. "Ooh, you'll take the last happiness of my life," Leroy declared, sighing heavily when Maya told him about their plans. "But I understand you. You have to live your life, be happy. Besides, it might be hard for me, but I'll be able to visit, right?" "Of course." Maya smiled, putting her arm around Leroy's shoulders, awkwardly adjusting herself to the side of the wheelchair. "Besides, it'll be interesting for Alex, too." She exhaled quietly. "I really want to be happy, Leroy. Really," she whispered. Leroy kissed her patronizingly on the top of her head. "And you will be for sure." But Boris and Alexandra did not show the same understanding of the situation as their son. The news that their only grandson was being taken abroad, and perhaps forever, almost gave them a heart attack. "You're not taking our boy away," Alexandra declared. We'll get lawyers. You're not taking our boy away. I don't want to disappoint you, but I don't think you're going to get anywhere," Maya said coldly. It was bitter to realize, but their relationship had not changed over time. Just as they couldn't understand each other, they couldn't understand each other. There was only one fragile thread that connected them. "Alex, this child is not on your papers. He's my son, and I can take him away." "Will we at least know where you're taking him?" Boris asked, comfortingly stroking his wife's back. Maya was silent. A couple weeks later, Maya, James, and Alex did decide to go. Leroy couldn't see them off, so he said goodbye to his son and Maya at the apartment. Maya promised to be in touch, and Alex kissed his daddy goodbye. At the airport, he hugged his grandparents long and thoroughly, comforted his crying grandmother while his stepfather took care of things, and his mother waited patiently on the sidelines. "Don't worry," Alex said importantly, like an adult. "I'll write to you and I'll call you. And you come and visit me too." Boris looked at Maya and she nodded faintly. "I'll tell you where we'll live," she said. The same feeling that had guided her during the first year of Alex's life guided her now. This was his family, his closest people. She couldn't prevent them from communicating. "Maya," suddenly Alexandra called to her softly, "forgive us for everything." Maya stared at them for a couple minutes, then slowly nodded, smiled, and her son smiled too, and waved his grandparents with his little hand. Of course, no one would take his grandparents away from him either. And Mommy and Daddy,